for tuning in to No Wine in No Time. I'm your host Dave, and today we're going to explore the traditional wines of Valpolicella, Italy. So where exactly is Valpolicella, Italy? Well, it's located in the Verona province of Italy, and that's in the northeast corner of Italy itself. Grapes have been cultivated here for thousands of years and were first brought to this region by the Greeks. Now, importantly, these DOC and DOCG level wines center around four specific red grapes that loom as the most important in this region, and they are Corvina, Rondinella, Molinara, and Corvinone. So these are very specific grapes native to that area and ones that probably aren't household names. But there are four different styles of wines that are produced in this area, and I want that to be the focus of this specific video. So the first one is just a Valpolicella Rosso, and it could be a Valpolicella Rosso or a Valpolicella Superiore. Now what that means is that's a red wine made from those grapes I just mentioned and fermented to be in a dry style. This is the most basic of wines coming out of that area, and one that is a good flavor of what those grapes bring to the table, but they make some very special wines moving forward. So the next class of wine takes grapes that are harvested at the peak of ripeness, and then they take them to the attic of the vineyard itself, into drying rooms, dry them out on straw mats. The Italians call this process appassamento. So they're taking and drying the grapes. Well, why in the world would they want to do that? Well, a grape that's picked at its peak of ripeness has a beautiful sugar, acid, and water balance. If we dry the grapes slightly, we remove only one of those components, and that's water. So we intensify the sweetness, we intensify the acid, and in turn we intensify the flavor of the wine. Now looking at appassamento wines, they head in two different directions in Valpolicella. The first one is one called a Recioto. So a Recioto can be either white or red, as you can see here. This is a white version of Recioto. And this particular wine, done in the appassamento style, in other words, the dried grape style, but fermented lightly so that a lot of residual sweetness remains. So basically this is a dessert wine. Then we start to look at what really is the king and what defines Valpolicella. And that's a wine like this. It's called Amarone della Valpolicella. So same grapes we talked about, Corvina, Rondinella, Molinara, Corvinone, and those grapes are picked at their peak ripeness, brought to the attic of the vineyard, dried on straw mats. Now what's interesting about it, according to Italian wine laws, they must dry for 120 days. That's a tremendous amount of drying of the grapes. So basically what we're pressing is raisins. So these wines are very, very muscular, full of flavor, but also very, very high in alcohol based on that process. So we talked about Valpolicella Rosso, the basic wine. We talked about Recioto, the dessert wine. Amarone della Valpolicella, the muscular, full-bodied wine. Well, there is one more wine style that I want to talk about, and that's one called a Ripasso. So in a Ripasso style wine, we take a Valpolicella Rosso, and then we repass the pomace from Amarone or from Recioto. So what exactly does that mean? Well, when a wine goes through its final press, the skins, the seeds, the stems are pressed, all the juice comes out, and usually that's discarded. But in a Ripasso wine, we are going to repass. That's what Ripasso means in Italian. Repass that through a quote-unquote inferior wine to increase its tannins, its phenolic compounds, and also its glycerin content. So think about this. If we're making a cup of tea, and we stick the tea bag in, and we steep it for a minute, we're going to have tea that's, I don't know, probably pretty drinkable, but a low intensity. If we take and leave that tea bag in for 10 or 15 minutes, we now have tea that's very dark, very strong. Well, that's what this Ripasso or Ripasso type of style does. It fortifies or strengthens a weaker wine and makes it a little bit better wine. So let's go ahead and taste an Amarone della Valpolicella to kind of let you know what the king of those wines would be. And the one I picked for you today is one from Ferrari, and this is an Amarone della Valpolicella from 2009. And when I talked about these wines being very muscular and very high in alcohol, when you look at the label on this particular wine, the alcohol content is 17%. That's as high as we possibly can get without fortifying a wine. Remember fortification, we talked about that in our port wine video, but fortifying is when you add alcohol. So there is no added alcohol to this, but all yeast activity dies at 17%. So this is as strong of a natural wine as we can possibly get. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. When we look at this Ferrari Amarone della Valpolicella, we see that it's black. It's completely dark. You can't see through the wine. It's opaque, and that kind of gives you an idea of the strength of what this wine is. If we go ahead and swirl it, and when we swirl it we can see through it a little bit, but it's still quite dark. Let's catch the aromas. Coming out of the glass is aromas of cocoa powder, of chocolate, of dark fruits like, let's think, prunes and raisins. We can tell this is going to be a very mature, muscular wine. Now let's take it across the palate. An Amarone della Valpolicella packs quite a punch. When it rolls across the palate, what's neat about one of these wines is it enters the mouth with a little bit of sweet plum, almost cherry type flavors. Then it hits mid-palate and has a tremendous lift from beautiful, strong acidity. Then on the backside of the palate, it has very, very gripping tannins. What's interesting about this wine, with it being 17% alcohol, you would expect that the alcohol would disintegrate itself from the wine. It's beautifully integrated. Even though this is a very strong, very muscular wine, it is intense, but also restrained and balanced at the same time. That's really the art form of making an Amarone della Valpolicella. Anybody can make a strong, muscular wine, but to keep it strong but in balance is really the feat of the winemaker. So I'm going to enjoy a little bit more of this Amarone. Thanks so much for tuning in, and please join us next time, because soon you'll know wine in no time.